and now one of my favorite moves in chess history by Boris Spassky. He ignores the threat to his rook. He doesn't care at all. Hello everyone, and welcome to this episode, which is going to be a tribute to Boris Spassky, the 10th world champion who has just passed away. I just woke up today to this really sad news. Spassky was a bit of a legend, popular pretty much universally among chess fans, his peers. He was such a character. We're going to be talking about him as a person, not just his chess moves, but we will be checking out one of his best games ever as well. Spassky, he was world champion between 1969 and 1972. In 69, he won the title from Tigran Petrosian. It was actually a rematch. Spassky had been defeated in his first world championship match in 1966, but he got revenge, taking the title in 69, and he held on to it for 3 years, eventually losing to Bobby Fischer in 1972 in Iceland in what has now been called the match of the century. Spassky, he was known as a gentleman. The match in 72 against Fischer probably wouldn't have taken place if it wasn't for Spassky smoothing things over, being honorable, putting the chess first. He basically said, Bobby needs to get all of his demands. We need to give him exactly what he wants. I want to play this world championship match. And I think Spassky came off really well from it. Although he lost the title, he went on to post some fantastic results the rest of his chess career. He eventually retired to France. He was living a great life, and he goes into the history books as such a legend. I was lucky to meet Spassky myself. He was 63 years old, so it was much later in his career. It was in the year 2000. I was just a kid. I was only 10, and I can still remember it to this day. I thought he was a bit of a giant. I don't think he was even that tall. He was under 6 foot, but I just remember him having this huge presence, this really kind of mischievous laugh. It was quite a booming laugh, but you could tell that he was just really enjoying life. The tournament took place in Ireland, in Kilkenny. He was just there to open things. I was playing in the tournament myself, but I was very lucky to kind of spend a few hours with him. I'd just beaten a grandmaster a while before, and I guess I was presented as this kind of prodigy, and he kind of put his arm around me. He was like, never take it for granted. You have to work hard every day, but you're on the right track. And he was full of wise, very warm words, full of laughter as well. And I still remember to this day this image of him kind of with a Guinness in hand, just giving a cheers to my dad and sharing some jokes. Years later, I asked my dad, what were you laughing about? What was so funny? And even a bit later in time, he was like, no, you're too young to understand. Spassky was a funny guy, such a popular player, and I'm hoping that this next game introduces some of you to the brilliance of who he was. He was such an attacker. And some of my favorite games actually in chess in general came up in the closed Sicilian, where he just had this one plan with white. He defeated all of the top players in the world using this plan. It was kind of, he was a real connoisseur of all of these different types of openings, romantic openings we call them, where you sacrifice pieces, you go on the attack, you just play for the glory, play for the history books, and he will definitely go down in history. So let's jump in with some chess. Boris Spassky against David Bronstein from 1960. It was a King's Gambit, one of the most romantic openings in chess. Boris here with the white pieces starting with pawn to e4, and after e5, this is the King's Gambit. It's not regarded as the most sound opening. Essentially, you lose a pawn with white as early as move 2. It's not just any old pawn either. After this pawn is captured, it's a proper gambit because you cannot win it back anytime soon. And you've actually opened up your own king, the black queen, often aiming to dive in and give a nasty check. So here, white's best move is to play knight to f3, as Spassky did here, bringing the knight out. And now a challenge in the center. Back in the day, this was a very popular counter gambit, black gaining a bit of time for development. These days, it's well known that other moves might be more promising. For example, stepping this pawn forward, stepping this pawn forward to protect the pawn you've just captured. Bobby Fischer, Spassy's great rival throughout their lifetimes. He advocated this move, just pushing a pawn in front of the queen. But Bronstein in 1960 decided, okay, full battle in the center. And after a recapture, not taking back with the black queen, because that would expose her and white would gain a bit of time by bringing the knight out. Instead, we saw black's bishop develop. So the king's gambit now no longer a gambit. It's level on pawns. The white knight jumping out. And Spassky, the one thing he taught the chess world was that control over the center was so key. Of course, this was known beforehand, but somehow Spassky's pieces always gravitated towards the center. He would never be afraid of pushing his pawns forward as far as they could go in the middle of the board. And we see in this game he was later rewarded. Here, it's a bit of an odd pawn structure, but both sides have completed development. White has castled, black has castled. The central pawns are the main feature for white. A bit weak, you would say. But likewise, this black pawn on f4, a bit weak, a bit of a target. It sticks out. And suddenly, after pawn to h6, a very slow move by Bronstein, Spassky leapt into action. He dropped his knight in the center, hitting this black bishop, the defender of this pawn, which might soon disappear as well. This is a pawn sacrifice because it allowed Bronstein to take white's pawn in the center. But Spassky, again, following that motto of pushing forward his central pawns as far as they could go, gaining space, creating squares behind for his pieces, kicked away Bronstein's knight from the center. This knight leapt in. It was going to be captured or traded off anyway. And now the trade of bishop for knight, pawn to c5, kicking back the black bishop. Again, the motto of space being super important. Note how black here is struggling for kind of squares. Note also how white's pawns on dark squares will really complement the bishop on light squares. The breakthrough soon happens on the light squares. Black's bishop forced back now. Bishop to c2, clearing the path for the white queen. Look how there's a battery already on this diagonal. There's a clear square. There's a clear kind of infiltration place for the white queen to deliver checkmate later. So a nice kind of prep move, we would say. The black rook slides across. The white queen does step up. Now, if the white knight ever disappears, there are checkmating ideas in the air. Black reacted by trying to distract the white queen away. So pawn to e2, clearly aiming to capture this white rook with check. And now one of my favorite moves in chess history by Boris Spassky. He ignores the threat to his rook. He doesn't care at all. He says, okay, I've got a spare in the corner, the white rook in the corner here, ready to jump out and replace the rook anyway in the attack. He says time is more important than pieces. Time is more important than material. He simply leaps forward with his knight, knight to d6. To me, this is just pure genius. The intuition, the kind of understanding that you don't need to move your rook, that you can sacrifice, and also the kind of just that instinct, that consistency, all-out attack. It's really beautiful to me. Here, black could actually take the white rook with a check and make a new queen. The white rook would recapture and the game would continue. This transposes into what happens in the game, so we'll examine this in a moment. But Bronstein, defending, decided, okay, this pawn is still a distraction. He wants to leave it there as bait for the white queen to get distracted, to retreat. But Bronstein first defended with his knight, covering the square the queen wanted to jump to. This also reminds me of the rhyme by Bent Larsen, a knight on f8, there is no mate. But this is the exception to the rule, because now a second sacrifice, knight takes f7. The knight was poisoned on the previous move, the white queen was coming in. Now, the queen has no squares to jump to, so he needs to create squares for his queen to do the damage. King takes knight now would lure the white king out, and we would have seen a beautiful checkmate now. Knight to g5 would be a double check. The knight and rook hitting the king. Double checks can't be blocked, the king has to move, and if it retreats now, multiple ways to deliver checkmate. And the most beautiful one, to my eyes, I remember seeing this in Garry Kasparov's book, My Great Predecessors. Queen to h7, check. Maybe not the quickest, but the most beautiful. Knight takes queen, and now you slide the other way. This check forces the king into the corner. Another knight check, the king has to move, and now you can do this in multiple ways. But you retreat, and eventually you jump in. The knight traps the king in the corner. The bishop controls the escape route. This would have been a beautiful end to the game. Instead, Bronstein defended in a different way. He did decide to capture the white rook with a check. This queen no captured by the white rook in the corner. And again, if you take this white knight ever, then this checkmate pattern with the white queen jumping in, all on the light squares, would have occurred. Instead, the black bishop jumps out, trying to delay the checkmating attack. Spassky said, yes, please, I'll take that bishop. Queen exchange. This one was one he did not want to agree to, simply sliding back his queen. The queen is going to deliver the killer blow. And the final few moves to this game, bishop to f6, controlling the dark squares, but that's not where the action's happening. The knight jumps forward. 3 is normally the magic number in chess. If you have 3 attackers, you normally have great prospects of delivering checkmate. But here, it's not just 3 pieces. It's these 2 knights, it's the queen, it's the bishop, and it's the rook. It's 5 attackers, not so many defenders. The bishop lined up now against Bronstein's king. And after a capture, knight takes, the king slid across, queen to e4. Here, Bronstein resigned. The end is inevitable now. The king only has 1 square to retreat to. If it steps back, we would have seen another rook sacrifice. Rook takes, knight check, removing the defender of this square. And no matter which way black recaptures, there's going to be a royal fork, a family fork, hitting the king, the queen, the rook. This would have been over. And likewise, if the check at the final position had been blocked by the black pawn, rook takes knight yet again, removing the defender, and whichever way black recaptures, queen, rook is the same. There would be a check, and now a knight check, forcing black to lose the queen to delay the checkmate. Spassky was a great attacker. I think games like this will be what he's remembered for. But just to round things off, I want to show another beautiful combination by Spassky, another one that's going to be printed in newspapers, magazines, for the near future, over the next days and weeks as the world comes to terms with the loss of this world champion. Spassky here, it looks very level. He does have an extra pawn with white. He's playing against Viktor Korchnoi, another legend of the game, who's no longer with us. But this extra pawn helps to defend white's king. However, the black king looks super safe in the meantime. Spassky, though, proved this was not the case. He set up a crazy, cunning tactic here by bringing his knight in. The knight is defended by white's rook, and the knight attacks the black queen. Here, a mistake by Korchnoi in a difficult position anyway, but he brought his queen in to try and trade off, to swap. But there was no trade to be had. Knight to e6 check is a cool deflection tactic. The black knight cannot move and capture. The black knight needs to defend its queen. So the king instead slid across to the side. And for those of you watching at home, now is the perfect moment to pause your video. Give yourself a few seconds, try to work out how Spassky forced resignation, forced checkmate here. And yeah, this one is reminiscent, if you want a clue, a hint, it's reminiscent of Carlsen against Karyakin in 2016. Pause now and try and figure it out for yourselves. And the winning move, the beautiful move that Spassky had spotted, was queen to h6 check. It's so rare to see a queen sacrifice on an empty square. Normally sacrifices happen with captures, they happen in the process of a big attack. But queen h6 forced Korchnoi here to resign. If the king goes back, there would have been a rook check and checkmate next move along the back rank. However, the key beautiful point is that if the king captures the queen, suddenly the king has been lured onto a square that there is no escape. The rook does the killing while the knight traps the king, covering the escape squares. Spassky was such a visionary. This is maybe his most beautiful move of all time, and the 10th world champion will always be remembered. An inspiration to all, and I hope this helped you learn more about the great man. I'll leave you now with my favorite Spassky quote. He was once asked by a journalist which he prefers, chess or sex? And Spassky, true to form, replied, "It depends on the position."